theory can be very useful because it introduces the necessary objectivity but keeps some necessary subjectivity for my purposes. And this theory is the theory of algorithmic information, also known as code model of complexity. And basically, code model of complexity of a string is the length in bits of the smallest computer program that produces the string. So if someone asks you which of these strings on your screen look more or less random, with traditional probability theory, you wouldn't justify to say that the string with letter B is the less random, because any of the three strings would have exactly the same probability to be produced by a uniformly random process, generating strings of the same length. But with code model of complexity, you can find a short program that produces the non-random looking string to justify their non-random character. For example, this program produces the string of alternating zeros and ones, and it can produce a string arbitrarily long with the same pattern without having to increase the program size itself. This means that this string of alternating zeros and ones is of low random complexity. In other words, this program is the compressed version of an arbitrarily long string containing this alternating pattern. Before coming back to code model of complexity, let me introduce Wolfram's behavioral classes. Stephen Wolfram found that cellular automata and other systems can be basically classified in 4 behavioral classes. Class 1, for example, are systems that evolve into homogeneous states, or simple behavior. Class 2 develop into periodic states, such as fractals and crystal-like objects. Class 3 systems are random-looking ones. And Class 4 display persistent structures over time, with part looking random and other parts looking simple. Here are some examples of cellular automata that display different complexity. And you can see the evolution of cellular automata for some number of steps, and their compressed and uncompressed lengths plotted next to the cellular automaton evolution. And you can see that the evolution of class 3 cellular automata, like rule 30 that you can see on your screen, that looks very much random, is very hard to compress, while simple rules are very easy to compress. However, notice that if something is hard to compress with an algorithm, it doesn't mean that it cannot be compressed. This is why the compressibility approach based on code model of complexity retains some subjectivity that I find useful to classify systems. The subjectivity of code model of complexity actually comes from the fact that the measure is, it is used a fancy name, semi-computable. That means that no Turing machine can compute the length of the shortest program for a given string in general. So only approximations or upper bounds, to be more precise, are possible. But this is a desirable property of a measure of complexity, because it is because of its power that it turns to be semi-computable. And it is this thing that we call semi-computability that compression is a sufficient test for non-randomness. That means if something is compressible, then for sure it has low complexity, but not the other way around. And this slide shows that by looking at the compressed lengths of evolution, one can classify the behavior of this cellular automata. And this is very similar from my perspective to another important contribution of Alan Turing to science. That is Turing's imitation game, also known as the Turing-test. In the original Turing-test, the test consists in determining whether behind a screen there is a human or a computer answering a question. Turing used this approach to give an answer to the question of whether computers could be intelligent, the question that actually gave birth to the field of artificial intelligence. And Turing replaced the question with a test and claimed that if a computer succeeds the Turing test, that is, that it would fool a human to make it believe that at the other end there is a human instead of a computer, then the computer should be declared intelligent. In my approach, to computation, the compression algorithm can be seen as an interrogator of the programming capabilities of a system, where the questions are initial conditions to the programs, and the answers are lengths of the compressed answers to these external stimuli. If the source is somehow programmable, then one should be able to declare that source to compute and to be some sort of computer. But unlike in Turing's test, where things are black or white or intelligent or not, I would like a graded measure of computation, a measure indicating whether I can actually program something to behave like a computer program. And so I came up with a measure based in this compressibility that can be consulted in any of my papers on this subject if you go to my web page. And so this approach can deal with situations like Chalmer's ROC, where I can assign a very low computing degree, indicating in agreement to our intuition that a ROC is not like a computer, because it is very difficult, if not impossible, to program anything on a ROC to carry out any computation, if that makes any sense actually to think of programming a ROC. And things like computers, such as the game of life, or this Wolfram Rule 110 that you are looking on your screen, that has proven to be Turing universal, have large programmability scores in agreement to the knowledge that we have about this cellular automaton. Unlike this other one that is another cellular automaton that behaves very simple and actually is very difficult to reprogram or to do any computation on it other than very simple things. And the measure can be applied to other than computers by measuring this programmability index of physical and biological systems. Here is a sketch of how this would work, sorting various systems by variability and controllability, which are the two orthogonal properties I think are fundamental for computing. And for example, for weather and Brownian motion that have great variability, they are very hard to control. And on the other extreme, rocks that have a low variability and are therefore trivially controllable are not in the programmability diagonal. So in the diagonal, you see living organisms and other programmable systems. And in this way, I think the question of life and how to recognize natural and artificial intelligence, and also natural and artificial life, is deeply connected to the question of how to recognize computation and whether things can be reprogrammed or not. And after all this, you may ask, what am I doing in one of the best medical universities, Karolinska Institute? Well, one can use, because I'm a computer scientist, by the way, one can use and exploit all these ideas to reprogram living systems to make them do things at will. At the end, this is the whole idea of programming something. Here's an example of finding the right input for porphyrin molecules to make them behave in different ways. That is what it means to program something, to find the inputs for the desired output. It is all about mapping the parameter space to the output space. In this case, we call it the conformational space of these molecules. The conformational space is just the space of possible shapes that these molecules can form. And that is interesting because in biology, shape is function. And this is a very powerful idea because one can program molecules to do things like carrying out a payload to be released when some conditions are met. Releasing, for example, a chemical that may be used for biological markers or even to fight diseases. And as a proof of concept, we have applied these programmability measures to a large set of biological simulations from a well-known database of biological models called biomodels. We have found that the programmability measures are sensitive to the robustness of different models, apparently distinguishing between models that are related to cellular versus metabolic processes. Here are some plots of the programmability trajectories of different models, some showing low variability while others have high variability but different degrees of controllability.